three main ways to have an apologetical conversation. And give you guys the circumstances in which you should use each one of them. So, I would say that the one that you should use the least, but the Catholics are so well practiced at using the most, is just flat out giving information, giving statements. Right? We use this one all the time, and we use it too much. Because we sit down and we say, here are facts, enjoy them. Chew on that. Like, it's so true. It's exactly how we go into arguments. It's like, okay, well, we have to be on the defensive, right? Because we're the Catholics, so we have to defend ourselves. I mean, heck, it's called defending the faith, right? Well, they also have to prove all of their points too, so it's like we're not necessarily the ones who should be 100% on the back foot. But whenever we come in and just throw out statements, it's like, hey, I don't have time for you. Here's an explanation. Now I'm gone. Right?
Thanks, man.
And let's be real, when has someone sitting down and just throwing facts down your throat ever changed your mind?
No.
Yes, it doesn't ever change your mind. In fact, it gets really boring really quickly.
My entire life.
You guys should know you sit in school for the vast majority of the day.
Oh, yeah.
Except for like taxes.
So the only time that I think that you should throw out facts are when you do not have the time to give the other explanations. If someone, for instance, I will throw out facts whenever someone comes to me, like in a confirmation interview. They'll sit down with me. I've only got like 5 minutes, if that, depending on how the rest of their interview is gone, to answer their question. So I'm like, cool, here's your answer. Do you have any questions about it? Did it help? So I kind of use it as a last resort. Second type. This is probably the least used type, but if we're following Christ's example, it should be our most used type because it was the type that he used the most. That is stories and parables. It is a art that has very drastically gone out of style. It is very hard for us to be like, well, I've got this story in my back pocket. What do you think? One time I was having a conversation with a friend. She was like, David, I don't think I believe. Like, this is while I'm in college. She's like, David, I'm really struggling about my belief in God. Like, all this bad stuff is happening in my life right now. And why would God, allow evil? So I was like, oh, the question of evil. I'm sitting down having this conversation. Everything that I am coming up with is not working. She's like, I don't agree with that or whatever. And so I was looking around and I saw trash cans. And I went, trash cans. That's an evil, right? Or I was like, let's look at trash cans. Trash, that's an evil. It's all over the place. We always go walk by a trash can and we're like, ooh, that smells. Or we kind of try and stay away from them unless we have trash to throw in there. And we always kind of look at them as something gross, something bad. But let's imagine the world if there weren't any trash cans. And then she was like, oh, that makes sense. Evil, I don't exactly remember where I was going with that. But that was an example of a story that I had used and a parable that I had used to talk to her about about good versus evil. And so, if we can pull those things in and make those stories, if people relate to stories. It's why books are so good. It's because we read a book and we go and we get immersed in the story. We get immersed in the characters and the things going on because we find ways to relate. I will also say that this is probably the most difficult of all out of the three, but it was the one that Jesus used the most. Granted, he's also the one he's also God, so he's the best apologist. So like, he's going to be really good at those.
Knows everything to like pull example from.
Exactly. I will say that my last one, and this is the one that I stress that you guys use all the time, because while I would say that it's the second most used by Jesus, Jesus used this form a lot, but it's one that we can also use very easily. It just takes a little bit of practice. This is why you guys have to practice a Catholic Survival Guide, is so that you guys can get good at having these conversations. John was over here wiping off his lipstick. He was just like,
It does look like it.
it did look like he was wiping off lipstick, right?
I was just saying in general all the time.
Oh, there you go.
Can we get back to the subject?
Instead of roasting John.
He's talking about
Yeah, I mean, it's such luscious lips. Like.
All right.
And Joel. Restraining order.
I'm pretty sure that I already had my night on homosexuality, right? Recently enough, ready to work.
Yeah.
It's recording.
All right.
Young recording, right?
So this form is questions. I stress this one so often to you guys. Questions. You should never, in a conversation about the faith, where you're talking with someone who doesn't know or who you're trying to come to a certain belief, the best way to have them come to understand it is them coming to that understanding themselves. This is part of why the stories work so well, is because they get the message out of the story, out of the truths in the story. But when you ask questions, it is literally them coming to that understanding through your questions. I know that you guys have probably all heard this story before, because I tell this story all the time, so every year I go on a retreat for myself at the very beginning of summer before I go on 5 retreats with you guys over the summer, because I need it. So while I was there this past year, one of the guys from Catholic Answers came onto the stage, and he was talking to us about apologetics. And he was talking to the youth ministers about apologetics, and he started stressing to us the importance of asking questions. At first I'm like, well, why do I have to ask questions? He's like, here's a statement, go. Until he was like, all right, just so that everybody understands, what we're going to do is I'm going to let anybody who wants. Okay, first off, this is a conference. This is a conference just for youth ministers. Okay, so there's like 1,000 youth ministers in this room, and 1,000 Davids. Yeah, it's terrifying. So he goes, I want you guys can words. Anybody who wants can come up and get in line. Here's what's going to happen. The people who come up, they're going to play devil's advocate. He said, I'm going to defend the faith, asking only questions. So he was not allowed to make a single statement in the entire thing. They come up one at a time in about 30 seconds or less. He gets through each one of them, gets them stumped, just asking questions. And I was like, I like that. This is my new favorite way of doing apologetics. Because while I was sitting there, I was like, what happened was that he had the point that he wanted them to get to, whenever I talk to you guys about how to do apologetics, I always tell you, what are the two most important questions? Those of you who've done this before.
What do you believe in and why?
What do you believe in and why? So, because you have to formulate that understanding, that definition of terms of what it is someone believes before you can start trying to find that middle ground between you, so that's something that you both believe in and agree on, okay? Because if you're if you're talking to an atheist and you're starting to throw scripture at them, they're going to go, what? So if you find that middle ground, that's something you both agree on, then what I always tell you guys is, okay, you have that. What is your end point? What is the one fact that you want them to come to know, come to understand? Okay? And then all the questions are doing is leading them from here to here. Okay? And sometimes here to here is this long, and sometimes here to here is this long. Sometimes it's a very long conversation because, as some people know, arguing with me whenever I'm playing devil's advocate is not fun. Because it's more of like, there to there long. Because I'm just really good at being like, well, here's things that are really random. Aliens! So, when you start to use that formula for talking with somebody, you begin taking that, it's more of a linear path that'll keep you on track because, one, they're not dominating the conversation. You are. But you're doing it in a way where they're doing the majority of the speaking. So I shouldn't say you're dominating it, but you're controlling the flow of the conversation. Whereas if they're just jumping down your throat about things, you're very much on the back foot, and that's not really a fun conversation to be a part of. But if you're having that conversation and they like, okay, here's this, let's have this as an actual conversation. So going back to my point, when you ask questions, it's basically saying, okay, let's take these little steps. Let's get you there logically from point A to point B. And personally, I think that it's one of the best forms of apologetics. Jesus was really good at stories. I'm generally not really good at whipping out stories. I'm a great storyteller, but I'm just not really great at being like, random story out of nowhere. And part of this is going to be figuring out what you're good at. And maybe you're really good at a different form of apologetics, a different form of arguing that I haven't mentioned here. And that's okay. If you're really good at statements, change. Get better at other things. Because statements don't convert people. Statements don't convince people. I should say most of the time, statements don't change people's minds. It does happen on occasion, but it's more often than not going to just be a detriment. Because you also don't give them the opportunity for growth in that. And when you come to something yourself, it's just so much better, right? Like, the things that you believe because you've come to them on your own, not because someone was trying to shove it down your throat, right? Are there any questions? Yes.
Like when you're using questions and stuff, and like when you say you're trying to get them to that point, it's like, what if they do start going on those tangents? Are you still just gonna like, okay, like gotta rephrase my question and try to get it back, or you could be like, hey, making the statement that they're going off topic?
Yeah, that's a really awesome question.
Well, because I was thinking from the perspective of like only questions. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
how do you do it if he was only asking questions?
So whenever he was only asking questions, it was, part of it is the handoff. There's always a handoff with questions. Another thing about questions is that it keeps a conversation going, which is important for apologetics because it helps build a relationship. But there was maybe once or twice that he did have a statement sentence, but it was always immediately followed with a question. What I always recommend in those situations where someone starts to, say someone brings up a really awesome point. So maybe you're having a conversation about Scripture, and someone brings up something that they don't agree with about Mary. Okay? Instead of being like, oh, well, let's talk about Mary now. You should be like, hey, actually, you brought up that you like in that statement you kind of mentioned something about you don't necessarily agree with what we believe about Mary. I'd love to have that conversation with you another time, or after this conversation. So basically saying, hey, this is really good, but let's come back to it because this isn't. Let's finish answering the question that we have right in front of us, and then we can move on to that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Another thing to add on to what you said, and
Yeah.
something I found with great success, is you do it with love.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yes, absolutely. That is definitely a part of these conversations. I am talking more of like the mechanics of it, but if you are not having these conversations and coming from a loving place, you're not going to do anything good. In fact, you will probably start getting angry or upset, or because you're not taking it as something where you're looking for the betterment of another person. You're taking it for your own glory. And none of these conversations are for our own glory. Believe me, the number of them that go wrong, it's not for your own glory.